Good afternoon. If you just joined us, my name is Rebecca Sharp, and I'm an archive specialist, and I provide reference services at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. Before our next presentation begins, I have a few things to go over. First, you can submit your question for a speaker via Twitter using hashtag GenFair2014 or through YouTube chat. The speaker may not be able to answer all of your questions in the allotted 10-minute Q&A session. For captioning, go to the virtual fair website and click on the link for today. The videos are being recorded and will be posted on the fair website by the end of November. If you're following the schedule, this is lecture number 16, and it's entitled Friend or Foe, Documenting Alien Ancestors During Times of War. And our speaker is Elizabeth Burns. The federal government created documentation of aliens, immigrants living in the United States who were naturalized during times of war in the 19th and 20th century. Come learn about the application files and lists utilized by a variety of federal agencies during the Civil War, World War I, and World War II. This course will introduce underutilized records, highlight some of the most popular, and offer instructions for completing successful requests. Elizabeth Burns is an archivist at the National Archives at Kansas City. And I'm turning the microphone over to Elizabeth.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having us, and I will go ahead and get started because we have a lot of information to cover in the time that we have. So I'm Elizabeth Burns, and today we will be addressing the documentation of aliens during times of war. The session will look at records created by the federal government during the Civil War, World War I, and World War II, documenting aliens who lived in the United States. Our objectives today will be to discover some of the applications, files, and lists related to aliens available through the National Archives, and to learn some of the best practices for searching and completing successful requests. On the virtual genealogy webpage, you can access a copy of the PowerPoint and 2 supporting handouts. The first is a listing of National Archives offices that I will reference at several points during the presentation. The second is a listing of records available at National Archives offices outside of Kansas City. I will mention each of these sets of records during my presentation, and I wanted to make sure that you have the information since you will not find them listed on my slides. During the presentation, I'll be using my office in Kansas City as a lens to show the examples of the kinds of records that you can expect to find across the various National Archives offices. As I was able, I provided a link to the online catalog description where you can learn more about the records, but some have not yet been described or are not yet available in the catalog. You will need to work directly with archive staff at the offices listed to determine how to best access any records of interest. Before we start, I want to give an overview of the information that will be pertinent to keep in mind throughout my presentation. Here are a couple of broad definitions I thought might be useful as we start our conversation. An alien is any person who is not a U.S. citizen or national of the U.S., and an enemy alien is any person who is a citizen of a country which is in a state of conflict with the U.S. For example, German-born men and women that were residing in the U.S. during World War I. And then here are a couple of National Archives definitions that will help shape your understanding of searching for records within our holdings. A record group, we call them RGs, is a collection of organizationally related records designated by a number and the name of the federal agency that created them. For example, records created by the National Park Service are located within Record Group 79, or RG 79. On the other hand, a series is a set of documents accumulated and used together for a specific purpose during a distinct period of time, and the records in a series are usually arranged in a particular order. For example, think of your financial statements at home and how you might use them each year to prepare your taxes. You may have them in a folder and arrange them chronologically. This could be a record series. It would have a different than other record series that you keep. For example, you might have a file containing your pet's certificates proving their vaccinations. Generally, as I present today, you should keep in mind that there are alien records available at all of the National Archives facilities. In fact, the National Archives maintains more than 3,000 series of records relating to aliens, which cover the late 1700s to the 2000s. These records can include manifests of arrival, internment records, investigation records, naturalization records, case files, reports, and so on. Be aware, though, that across the National Archives, offices may use different titles for the same series of records, so you can't expect to see the exact same language used between offices. To help you differentiate the various offices, I provided the handout that lists all of our facilities across the country and a general breakdown of the geographic area that our records cover. For example, you can see that the National Archives at Kansas City maintains records from Missouri, Kansas, Iowa, and Nebraska, but we also happen to have some early records from Minnesota and the Dakotas. And you will see that Minnesota is also listed with Chicago, and the Dakotas are also listed with Denver. This list is a good starting point, but there may be loopholes, and National Archives staff will be able to help you navigate these. There are a few additional points that I want to make before we dive into today's content. We will not be addressing naturalization records directly during this presentation. If you're interested in naturalization records specifically, please refer to the handout of National Archives facilities to determine the appropriate office to contact. We also will not be addressing current immigration laws and documentation. Only records created during the Civil War, World War I, and World War II eras will be introduced. You should also be aware that a majority of the records discussed during this presentation have not been microfilmed and are not available online. You must contact the appropriate National Archives office to obtain copies of the records. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to begin our discussion today with the Civil War. When you're researching aliens during the Civil War time period, RG 110, Records of the Provost Marshal General's Bureau, Civil War, may be a good source of information. RG 110 records about aliens will predominantly be lists related to enlistment and exemption of alien residents. You'll need to keep in mind that the states covered and the types of records available will vary. I'm going to share 3 examples of RG 110 records available in Kansas City as a means of conveying the kinds of documents you may find. The first series we'll look at is Lists of Aliens Residing in Various Counties, 1861 to 1866, which were created in Iowa. The information recorded includes the name of the county, the townships included in the county, the names of the aliens residing in each. The lists are arranged alphabetically by county, and there is no name index. This means that you would have to talk to archive staff to search within the records. An interesting side note is that occasionally during the Civil War time period, federal courts were also keeping registers of aliens. For example, the courts for Detroit, Michigan, whose records are maintained by the National Archives at Chicago, kept registers of aliens from 1837 to 1906. Exemption lists are another good source of information about aliens during the Civil War time period. The series Exemption Lists and Related Papers, 1863 to 1865, from Missouri, includes certificates of exemption and also lists of men exempt from service, which detail the individual's county, township, name, and case for exemption, which may include alien status. Again, there is no name index, so researchers must contact archive staff to search within the records. Here's an example of an exemption record. You can see on this record we find out, I, Henry Eilert, do upon oath declare that I am an alien and a subject of the King of Hanover, that I immigrated to the United States in the year 1857, and that I have been living since that time in the state of Missouri, that I have never declared my intention to become a citizen of the United States, and that I have never exercised the right of suffrage at an election whatever. Just from that one sentence, we've gained information about his nationality, entry into the U.S., residence while in the U.S., that he was not a voter in the U.S., and that, as of this document, he had not pursued naturalization. Now let's compare this exemption record to another found within the Kansas City RG 110 holdings. The series List of Arrested Persons and Deserters, 1863, from Iowa's 3rd District, includes a list of men exempted from the draft. The information recorded includes name and reason for exemption, such as alien. Luckily, there is an index for this series, but the name index is only in the volume. There are no online finding aids available. You can see the amount of information recorded in this exemption record is significantly less than Henry Eilert's that we just viewed. As a researcher, you cannot discount this kind of records, though. They may not illuminate additional information about the family, but they are proof of an action in that ancestor's life, and there is value in that. The 3 series we just discussed are a small sampling of the variety of RG-110 records available at the National Archives. In Kansas City, there are a significant number of consolidated lists and registers from Missouri, Iowa, Kansas, and Nebraska that contain mentions of aliens. Additionally, RG-110 records are available at the National Archives offices in Philadelphia, Atlanta, Fort Worth, Denver, Seattle, Boston, New York, and Chicago. Though the quantity and types of records will vary by location, you should see your National Archives handout for a reminder of which state each office potentially covers. Let's move on to World War I. When you're researching aliens during the World War I period, RG-118, records of the U.S. attorneys, could be a good place to start. Records from RG-118 that may be of interest include enemy alien registration affidavits, alien application permits, reports on aliens, and correspondence relating to enemy alien and Espionage Act violations. When you're researching an RG-118, you do need to be aware of a limitation. Many of the RG-118 records are only available for a limited number of states. It's still always worth checking, though. During World War I, concern over potential espionage by German aliens living in the U.S. prompted the government to require each enemy alien to register with the U.S. Marshal Service. Registration involved completing a 4-page form. Kansas City maintains affidavits for individuals from the state of Kansas, which represent a broad cross-section of the German-born population of the state. Some American-born women married to aliens also appear. Other states that have a limited number of affidavits available through the National Archives include Arizona, which are maintained in Riverside, California, Louisiana, maintained in Fort Worth, and North Carolina, maintained in Atlanta. Be aware that each of these is small portions of the original records, not full sets representing the entirety of the state. Here's a sample registration affidavit. The form required the registrant to provide family information, details of immigration, the language that they spoke, a physical description, a photograph, and fingerprints. Another series of records from RG-118 is alien application permits. This series consists of permits to continue to reside, come within, pass through, be employed within, and conduct business within restricted zones. Restricted zones included locations around docks, factories, military camps, arsenals, and other sensitive areas. Kansas City maintains applications for the U.S. Marshal for the District of Kansas. There is a name index available in the research room, but there are no online indexes. Be aware, too, that there are individuals who could have both an alien registration affidavit and an alien application permit. So if you're inquiring, you should inquire about both when you place a request. Here's a sample permit. The alien application permits include the name and residence of the applicant, type of permit requested, and definition of restricted area, place and date of birth, number of years that they were a resident in the U.S., employment records since July 1914, arrest records, and a physical description including a photograph. Reports on aliens are a third series from RG-118 that can prove useful when researching alien ancestors. This series consists of reports, investigation summaries, letters and memoranda, fugitive circulars, and instructions received by the U.S. Attorney. The files relate chiefly to the investigation of individuals and groups suspected of violation of draft and espionage laws prior to the end of World War I, and relate to charges of draft resistance and evasion, loyalty of enemy aliens, citizenship of German and Austrian nationals, and accusations of conspiracy and sedition. Kansas City maintains reports from the U.S. Attorney for the District of Minnesota. There is no name index available, so you would need to work directly with staff to utilize these records for your research. Keep in mind, you may also find similar sets of reports from the World War II era. For example, from the U.S. Attorney for the District of New Hampshire, there is a series, Records Relating to National Defense and Enemy Aliens, 1941 to 1945, that's maintained in Boston, which discuss Germans, Italians, and Japanese nationals. Here's some sample report content from Minnesota. On the left is an application for exception from the classification of alien enemy, which was used, quote, for the purpose of obtaining the privilege of applying for naturalization as a citizen of the U.S. On the right is a fugitive circular sent out to various offices to assist in tracking down individuals under investigation by the Department of Justice. Correspondence relating to enemy, alien, and Espionage Act violations is a final series from RG 118 that I will suggest. This series consists of letters that were assembled during the investigation of alleged threats to national security during World War I. Espionage Act violations include, quote, conveying information with the intent to interfere with the operation or success of the armed forces of the U.S. or to promote the success of its enemies. Kansas City maintains correspondence from the U.S. Attorney for the District of Nebraska. There's no name index, so you'll need to work directly with staff to determine if these records match your needs. See your handout for examples of similar correspondence from the World War I and World War II eras. You may also need to consider activities your ancestor may have participated in. For example, if your ancestor had any patents for designs or inventions, you may want to research records relating to patents seized during the World War I era from RG 153, records of the Office of the Judge Advocate General Central Patent Section. You'll see records from RG 153 at our College Park, Maryland facility listed on your handout. A final series of records from Kansas City I would like to highlight from the World War I period is alien applications for permission to depart from the U.S. from RG 21, records of district courts of the U.S. The applications were submitted by aliens to the Department of State for permission to leave the U.S. during World War I. The Bureau of Immigration investigated each applicant and sent a recommendation to either grant or refuse permission to depart. Kansas City maintains applications retained in the U.S. District Court at Fort Scott, Kansas. A name index of the applications available in Kansas City can be found online and in our research room. Other National Archives offices may maintain these applications. For example, our Philadelphia office maintains 2,577 applications created in Philly. Here's a sample of the front and back of an alien's application. The forms are multiple pages in predominantly handwritten script. Each application contains an in-depth information about the subject, such as date and place of birth, information about family members, description of military service, details of immigration, and a photograph of the subject and anyone planning to travel out of the U.S. with them. Another RG-21 set of records that may be worth searching for are case files on detained enemy aliens. There's a set of these files for Cincinnati, Ohio, dated 1917 to 1919, that are maintained in Chicago, and they may exist for other locations as well. Now let's move into the World War II era. Record Group 147, Records of the Selective Service System, includes a series of aliens' personal history and statements forms, which can prove extremely useful when researching immigrant ancestors during the 1940s. Most states across the U.S. created alien personal history and statement forms. Sometimes these are found in a series of applications by aliens for relief from military service, so you'll need to pay close attention when you're searching. Also, you should be aware that in some cases these forms were transferred to the National Archives at St. Louis. So if you find that the office covering your state of interest does not maintain the records, you should check with St. Louis and follow up. Kansas City maintains forms from Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska, Minnesota, Missouri, and North Dakota. There are name indexes available on our website and in the research room, but please note that the Kansas index is currently only available in the research room. A correlating series you should be aware of is alien record cards, which document actions taken by alien registrants, including completion of a personal history and statement form. In Kansas City, we only maintain record cards from Missouri. Here's a sample of the front and back of an alien personal history and statement form. The 4-page form provides the draft registrant's name, residential history, birthplace, citizenship, educational background, date of entry into the U.S., military service, names of relatives, whether ever arrested, and organization affiliations. If you're interested in records relating to monitoring of aliens in the U.S., you may also consider looking at records from the Department of the Navy, which is RG 181, Naval Districts and Shore Establishments. such as correspondence and subject files. For example, the National Archives at San Francisco maintains records for the 12th and 14th Naval Districts, which relate to aliens. Another avenue to consider is records of U.S. internment for both Japanese and German immigrants. A number of National Archives offices maintain records of internment camps within the U.S., records of detainees, and so on. From RG21, Records of District Courts of the U.S., you should consider researching enemy alien notices and objections, which relate to petitions for naturalization filed after the start of World War II. These court orders and notices list hearing dates and the names of aliens required to appear before the court for a decision on their admission as citizens. Entries for individual petitioners include petition number, filing date of petition, petitioner's name, country of birth, and date of declaration of intention to become a citizen. Kansas City maintains notices and objections from the U.S. District Court at Topeka, Kansas. The records are arranged chronologically, and there is no name index, so you would need to work directly with archive staff to determine whether the individual you're seeking is represented in the records. These records are available at other National Archives offices as well. For example, there are records for Maryland at our office in Philadelphia, and there are records for Fort Wayne, Indiana at our Chicago office. Another possibly related series is orders regarding aliens and deportation. One that I'm aware of is for Hammond, Indiana. The records are maintained in Chicago, and the same kinds of records may exist for other locations. Now we'll move into my personal favorite set of records, which is RG 566, Records of the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service, and its predecessor, RG 85, Records of the Immigration and Naturalization Service. Both are also great resources for information on alien ancestors. In particular, you should be aware of the alien files, which are more commonly called A files. Kansas City maintains 456,333 files for individuals born 1910 and prior from all 50 states and U.S. territories. The National Archives at San Francisco currently maintains some of the files for individuals born from Reno, Guam, Honolulu, and San Francisco. The Alien Registration Act of 1940 required all aliens living in the U.S. to visit their local post office and register their alien status with the federal government. This process included completion of a form and issuance of an alien registration number. Beginning in April 1944, INS began using these registration numbers to create individual case files called alien files, or A files, which record the immigration and inspection process for aliens entering the U.S. and subsequent interactions with federal agencies. A files hold a wealth of data, including visas, photographs, applications, affidavits, correspondence, and more. There are a number of factors you need to take into consideration when determining if the individual you're researching could have an A file. This chart walks you through each of these scenarios. For example, if the individual you're seeking died before August 1st, 1940, they would not have been alive to receive an alien registration number and could not have an A file. But the National Archives may have other resources of genealogical interest, such as ship passenger manifest lists. Additionally, if the individual you're seeking naturalized between 1906 and March 31st, 1956, they will not have an A file, because during that time, INS was utilizing a filing system that included the creation of certificate files, C files, when anyone naturalized. You can request C files from the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service Genealogy program. If you determine that the individual meets the criteria to have an A file, you can search within the National Archives online catalog. All A files maintained by the National Archives are name searchable in the catalog. If you do not locate an individual you're seeking, but feel that they do meet the criteria to possibly have a file, contact the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service through their genealogy program at www.uscis.gov/genealogy. To make a record request for an A file, you should provide the individual's complete name, alien registration number, National Archives identifier, accession number, and box number. This may sound like a lot of information to track down, but I promise it is very easy to locate through a search in the online catalog. If you visit www.archives.gov/research/search and enter the name of the individual you're seeking, you'll be looking for results with the title alien case file for the individual's name. And the result will appear like the top image on the slide, where you can see the name, National Archives identifier, and a local identifier that will contain all the details I just listed as necessary for a successful request. If you provide me with those details, I can easily locate the file and help you work to determine if it's a match to the individual you're seeking. Another step you can take before submitting a request is to read the full catalog entry, as we've provided additional details in the scope and content note about the subject of the file, such as date of birth, country of origin, and so on, that may help you immediately determine if the file lines up with what you know about the person you're seeking. Always read the scope and content note, regardless of any set of records you're looking for. If you're in the online catalog, be sure you're reading the scope and content when you're researching in the National Archives online catalog. Also be sure that you scroll to the bottom of the description and note the contact information provided, as it will tell you which office maintains the records. Here's some sample content that can be found in A-files. On the left, you see an alien registration form that was completed during the 1940 registration process. It includes 15 multi-part questions that gather great basic biographical information about the subject, such as full name, aliases, date and place of birth, date and place of entry into the U.S., occupation, membership in organizations, prior military service, prior arrests, prior attempts to naturalize, and so on. On the right, you see an address report card and a permit to re-enter the U.S. From physical description to residence and non-census years and photos, the A-files really can contain anything and everything, even documents that were not federally created, such as birth, baptismal, marriage, and death certificates. They even show up from time to time. Other places to look for similar documents are in series such as Alien Enemy Naturalization Investigative Reports. I know that the Boston office maintains these reports from Connecticut, and other offices may maintain similar records as well. Now that we've discussed some of the kinds of records you might come across as you research your alien ancestors at the National Archives, let's look at some strategies for searching and requesting. I've mentioned the National Archives online catalog several times, so I'd like to do a quick walkthrough to familiarize each of you with the steps that you can take and refinement tools that are available. If you're searching the catalog broadly to try and hone in on the kinds of records that you may be able to find and that may be available to you, you can start by entering the online catalog at www.archives.gov/research/search. Once you're there, you can select the Advanced Search option. A new page will open, and you'll see a number of fields available to aid you in narrowing your search. In this example, I searched broadly on the term alien in the search field. Other broad search terms could include immigration and naturalization. In the middle of the page, you'll see a bar labeled Filter Archival Descriptions with an arrow next to it. If you click on the arrow, another set of filter options will appear. If you know a record group that may prove useful to you, scroll down to the bottom of the page and type the number in the record group field. For example, if I know that I'm interested in researching an ancestor who mustered into service during the Civil War, I might try RG110 in the box to see what kind of results populate. I made sure to note several record groups on the other records of the National Archives list that you received and throughout the PowerPoint. Once your results page populates, you'll see brief results listed on the right and refinement tools listed on the left. Be sure to take note of the number of results that populate to help determine if further refinements may help get the results to a more manageable quantity. One refinement that can be useful is refine by location. Looking at your handout that lists the National Archives offices, you can begin to deduce which facility could contain records for the states where your ancestors lived. Remember, the states listed with each office are general rules, but there are loopholes, so you may need to keep an open mind when refining your searches. Another search option is to look for finding aids and name indexes within the websites for individual National Archives offices. To do this, you should visit www.archives.gov/locations. Pick a facility from the list and spend time perusing their website. On the Kansas City webpage, we've created a research guides and name index site. The link can be found on the left-hand side of our main page. That includes series title lists and searchable indexes for some of our high-use records. Be aware that each office maintains additional indexes that they have not posted to their website, so talking to a member of the staff can prove extremely useful to your search. You may also want to consider trying topical searches within the National Archives website. A great place to start your search is to visit www.archives.gov/research/immigration/aliens and scroll to the bottom of the page. There are a number of links to resources on the topics of aliens, immigration, and naturalization that may prove useful to progressing your research. A search approach our staff sometimes uses is to study the Guide to Federal Records, found at www.archives.gov/research/guide-fed-records. You can search on terms or by specific record group number, and it's a great way to identify federal agencies that may have produced records about the topic you're researching. Oftentimes, researchers limit themselves just due to being unaware that their ancestors could have interacted with a large variety of federal agencies in sometimes unexpected ways. Once the results list appears, you can select an agency from the list and review the full description to discover the kinds of records that that agency produced. Be aware, though, the guide is currently out of date, but it can still be extremely useful in getting a broad idea of the possibilities. I actually learned about a new record group I had never known about as I prepared for this presentation. I came across RG 131 in the Guide to Federal Records. RG 131 is the Office of Alien Property, and I discovered that their agency administered all suits in federal courts and all claims relative to seizures and vesting of enemy-owned or enemy-controlled property during World War II. If you have ancestors who were aliens during the World War II period, this record group could have series relevant to your search. If you're not familiar with Access to Archival Databases, AAD, you may want to spend some time perusing the various data files maintained on the site. AAD provides descriptions of some National Archives records and allows you to search within the electronic records themselves. Keep in mind, the results you see when searching in AAD is extracted data in a spreadsheet, not a copy of an original record. Regarding aliens, AAD has a collection of passenger lists that can be a rich source of data on immigrant ancestors. The passenger lists include Russian immigrants from 1834 to 1897, German immigrants from 1850 to 1897, Italian immigrants from 1855 to 1900, and records for passengers who arrived at the Port of New York during the Irish Famine from 1846 to 1851. Another set of records that may be of interest are records about Japanese American relocated during World War II, which was created by the War Relocation Authority and relates to individuals evacuated from the states of Washington, Oregon, and California. A few general tips to keep in mind when you dive into your research at the National Archives. It is worthwhile to complete preliminary searches in the National Archives website. If you can reference a specific set of series of interest when you place a request, it helps narrow the search immensely. When submitting a request, you should provide the individual's name, general location of residence, and other basic biographical information as you're able. This could be date of birth, country of origin, names of family members, and so on. Any of that can be helpful as archive staff work to track down records and determine if any documents might match the individual you're seeking. As researchers, you also need to work to properly set your expectations. The kind of records and information recorded in each set of records vary. You will not always find in-depth information about the subject and their family. Like we saw today, you may only find the subject's name. You should also keep in mind that not every kind of alien-related record from each state survived, but it is always worth researching just to see what's out there. And finally, you need to remember that every piece of information, no matter how small, helps build the story. If you want to learn more about the National Archives at Kansas City and our online resources, please visit our website. Also be sure to join us on Facebook and Twitter to gain exposure to other record types that may help you in your family history research, and to learn about upcoming events like this genealogy fair. Thank you for taking time to join us today for this presentation. Hopefully you discovered new kinds of National Archives records related to immigrants that may be helpful in your family history research, and picked up on a few tips on the search and request process. I've noted contact information for my office in Kansas City on this slide, and at this point, I'm going to open it up to any questions you have.
Hello, Elizabeth. You have several online questions. The first one is, what clues should we look for to determine who might be in the A files?
Well, when you're looking for alien files, you really have to consider, was the person that you're researching still an alien in the 1940s? Were they alive? Had they pursued naturalization? Alien files can really represent a wide berth of people. Any foreign country, anywhere within the United States. Like I said, the files that we have at the National Archives at this point represent individuals born 1910 and prior, but alien files were created beginning in 1944 and are still created today.
Okay, your next question is, all 4 of my husband's grandparents came from Italy. I don't think they were naturalized by World War I, so there should be records on all 4 of them, correct?
Hypothetically, yes, there should be some kind of record that would be available. You have a few options at that point. One thing that you would want to think about is, are there other kinds of records? For example, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, INS, they were creating visa files, registry files. They really had a broad variety of records that they were creating during that time frame, surrounding like 1906, going through the World War I and World War II periods. So at the National Archives, there are things like the passenger arrival list. If you know that maybe they might have submitted a declaration of intention, you might look for that. You could go to the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service and have them do an index search and see if there's any file types that they maintain that INS would have created. So there are definitely options. That's actually something that would be worth talking to the National Archives office that covers the state where those individuals would have been residing to see what kind of records that office maintains about immigrants.
Another question, do alien records include those who were naturalized prior to the specific war?
Can you say the question one more time?
Yes. Do alien records include those who were naturalized prior to the specific war?
I guess it depends on the time frame that you're talking about. Naturalization records, like I said, if you're looking pre-March 31st, 1956, going back to 1906, the records probably won't show up in an alien file, but they could show up in a certificate file. And you could find naturalization records at the National Archives. Our naturalization records within National Archives holdings go back well before 1906. You can find a lot of early naturalization records. So I don't know that they would show up in alien-specific records, but there would be records of their naturalization and immigration that you should be able to locate.
The next question, where would I find records of German POWs who were interned in the U.S. during World War I, and how do I access them?
That is not something I actually know that much about. I'd have to do a little bit of looking, honestly.
For that particular question on the German POWs, please send an email to inquire@nara.gov. That's INQUIRE at N as in Nancy, ARA.GOV as in Victor. Your next question, Elizabeth. I do realize that Italy was not our enemy in World War I, like they were in World War II, but if persons were still not naturalized by that time, there would be records. Am I right?
Hypothetically, yeah, there should be records of Italian immigrants living in the United States during the World War I period. It wouldn't be enemy alien records, and that's a good differentiation to make. That's a case, again, where I would think about where they were living in the United States and talk to the National Archives office that covers that area. If they were still alive during the World War II period, and it's possible they could have an alien file, it's definitely worth looking into. I will say I handle a lot of Italian A files. And their files tend to be pretty interesting.
Where will we find lists of German POWs in, oh, that's another one that's similar to that. Let me skip that one. What about an Italian who traveled to Italy just before the war and ended up not being able to return until after the war? World War I was the war that they're referring to.
I mean, again, the kinds of records you'd be looking for might be passenger lists. If you have an idea that maybe they tried to get in the United States, there could be things like exclusion files. I guess it would depend on the situation.
Where might we find lists of alien POWs held in the U.S. and lists of employees that worked at these camps and on local projects? This seems to be a pretty popular question. Keeps coming up.
Seems very popular.
Keeps coming up in slightly different wording.
Okay. Well, one thing I can say, you were asking about employees at some of the camps. If they were considered federal employees, technically they would have a civilian file that should be available through the National Personnel Record Center in St. Louis. So that's something to keep in mind. Anybody who is working with the federal government should have an employee file. When it comes to POWs, honestly, there are a lot of different records that those show up in. I mentioned a few series during my presentation that would specifically reference Germans during that time frame. So check my list of sources that I provided. I will say, though, again, we're looking at the World War II period. If the person has an alien file, I've actually seen some really interesting alien files that contain transcripts from when they were at internment camps, Germans who were talking about, their loyalties to the United States, their feelings about Hitler. Lots of different things come into play there. So there are records that are going to be available. It's just a matter of honing in on who's going to have them, and what kinds of things you're actually going to find.
The next question. I have an ancestor who declared alienage during World War I, which was his legal right. Just wondering if he might be in any of these files, though he was born in Ireland, which was not an enemy country.
Again, it would depend on how long he was alive, and what his interactions with the federal government would have been. Coming into the U.S., again, you're going to be looking for those passenger arrival lists. He wouldn't have had to register as part of that 1918 enemy alien registration, but that doesn't mean that there wouldn't be maybe some kind of visa record, or if he was alive in the 1940s, an alien registration record. I don't know. There are possibilities for that. But again, I would look at where did they live when they moved into the United States and seeing what the office that covers that state happens to have when it comes to alien records.
The next question. Listening to the questions, one was concerning someone who was Italian, traveled to Italy, and wasn't allowed to return to the U.S. My question would be, why not? Italy was our ally during World War I.
There are actually a lot of different things that could have come into play there. Anything from not having the correct paperwork. If somebody didn't have a valid visa, they weren't allowed, regardless of their country of origin. They were not allowed to come into the United States. And so just getting your paperwork in order was sometimes a prohibitive reason for somebody not to come in. Another thing that could come into play, and I don't know the situation with this particular person, but if you have somebody that had a criminal record, if depending on the time frame, if they were involved in anything that was considered morally questionable, there are lots of different things that could impede somebody from being able to come into the United States. It wasn't necessarily just nationality.
Thank you. And the final question. Could these records include someone being temporarily extradited to the U.S.? If not, where might those records be found?
That's also one I wouldn't know too much about. You'd probably be better off emailing the Inquirer email address. I will say records like that, I don't believe would be found out in the regions. It would be something that might be at our College Park, Maryland facility, but I don't want to say that on the record. I'm not for sure.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. If the speaker did not get to your question, please send an email to inquire@nara.gov. That's N as in Nancy, QUIRE @N as in Nancy, ARA.gov as in Victor.